Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. For those of you that are just joining for the first time, my name is Nicholas Ohava, and I'm so glad you're able to stop by. For today, I wanted to try and alleviate some stress for the students that might be taking organic chemistry for the first time this fall semester, or if you're retaking it to try and earn a better grade in the course. I want to start off by saying that I truly feel organic chemistry gets a bad rap. Everyone always treats it as this cursed course where the professor hates everyone, they never want you to pass, and they want to crush all the pre-med streams. But I found organic chemistry to actually be one of my favorite courses during my undergraduate career. Today, I want to try to share some tips and tricks that I learned by taking the course to hopefully let you guys get an A as well. So without further ado, let's hop into it. My first tip would be to take your own notes. I know this might sound like a no-brainer, but seriously, take your own notes. The muscle memory you're going to develop by either using a pen or pencil on paper, or if you prefer an iPad Pro, an iPad with the Apple Pencil, or even the Microsoft Surface, it doesn't matter what you use, as long as you're the individual that's taking your own notes, it's going to benefit you a lot because you've seen the reactions, you've seen the mechanisms, you know what to expect on the quizzes and the exam. My second tip would be to practice, practice, practice. It's pretty straightforward. At the end of all the textbooks for organic chemistry, there's typically over 100 practice problems at the back, so you want to do these to try and reinforce the material that you learned in lecture. When I took the course, the book we had was the Wiley Organic Chemistry 3rd edition. It looks like this. So you could either get this as a PDF online, you can find it on eBay or Amazon, or you can even ask the upperclassmen if they have a copy. That way you can save a little bit of money, and it's free. Mine was from the bookstore. It's because I had a little bit of extra money, so I was able to afford the loose leaf, because I particularly don't like ebooks, so I do prefer a hard copy of the textbook when possible. I would also suggest not reading the textbook if you're crunched on time. This is because when you're in lecture, the job of the lecturer is to essentially compile all that information from the chapter and present it to you in a more digestible manner and a more understandable manner. But if you really love organic chemistry, then by all means, go ahead, read the textbook chapter. It's not going to hurt you. So when you're doing those back of the book problems, I usually had like a rule of thumb I led by. It was the 80% rule, where in each section, the back of the chapter is labeled like section 8.1, section 8.2, etc., etc. If you are able to get 80% of those questions right, and that means you don't mess them up, then I would just skip the rest of the questions in that section and move on to the next one. You clearly understand it, and you're going to do well. The other thing I noticed too is that when I did all the practice questions at the end of the book, that I did particularly well on the exam, which probably isn't a shocker to you that if you're doing the practice, you're going to do well. And that's because too, sometimes with our textbook, our instructor essentially took verbatim questions from the end of the chapter and put them on the exam. So those are free points that you'd be able to get just for practicing and preparing for the exam. The third tip would be to learn your nomenclature and the functional groups. On all my exams, the very first page was entirely just structure, 3 to 6, and we just had to name them, and that was all. So just by knowing how to name organic structures got you easy points that you could get just by learning how to name them. The other thing is that functional groups play a big role in organic chemistry. They're called functional groups because guess what? They have a function. So these are your bread and butter for when you're doing a mechanism. Let's say you had a primary aldehyde and alcohol. You know that the alcohol is really nucleophilic, which means that it wants to give its electrons to the aldehyde essentially. And that way you know it doesn't matter what the structures are. If you see that aldehyde on like a benzene ring, which is benzaldehyde, with a primary alcohol such as like ethanol, you know exactly what's going to happen. Those lone pairs on the oxygen are going to go and attack that carbon that's connected to the double bonded oxygen, and bam, you got your mechanism just like that. Another thing too that was like a bonus tip is for stereochemistry, sometimes that pops up in the nomenclature. I know that some of my friends and other students in class, they bought these little model kits where they were able to assemble, and this helped them visualize in 3D space how the structure would look, so when you had to do your wedges and dashes, you know where they would go. The fourth tip is to learn your reagents. These are also really important and vital to organic chemistry because this is how you make the reactions go. This is what's making the reaction actually happen. One example is potassium permanganate reacting with a secondary alcohol. You know that potassium permanganate, or you will learn that potassium permanganate is a really strong oxidizing agent, which means it's going to turn that secondary alcohol into a ketone. And if it was a primary alcohol, it would actually turn into carboxylic acid, just based on simple knowledge of knowing that potassium permanganate is a super strong oxidizing agent. But your professor's smart. They might not always be so straightforward on a mechanism portion of the exam where they'll show you two different types of functional groups and only one equivalent of reagent. You need to know which one would react in the scenario. Also with tip number 4, knowing the reagents is really telling you the answer for the exam. If you already know what is going to happen with the primary alcohol, a secondary alcohol, or tertiary alcohol, when in the presence of PCC or potassium permanganate again, it's going to save you a lot of thinking time in the exam, and you'll be able to use that time to go back to another question and really help you try to work through it as well. The 5th tip is knowing resonance. Resonance is your best friend. It's essentially a way of describing bonding inside a molecule, and it's predicting essentially where electrons are in a structure at a given time. And this way you're able to move the electrons around and see where there's a deficiency and where it's most likely that a nucleophile will attack an electrophilic carbon. It's also really helpful because resonance structures, like I was talking about, are able to show that electron deficiency, so it makes it a lot easier during a mechanism to see where that nucleophile is going to attack the structure. The 6th tip is to try and review your notes every day after lecture, preferably with a friend. One of the best ways to learn something is by teaching someone else. And if you have a friend in a class or a couple of friends in a class, you guys can get together and review it. I prefer using a whiteboard because number 1, they're really big, depending if your school has a place where you're able to use whiteboards. And you guys are able to switch off putting a structure on the board with certain reagents to see if you really understand the mechanism that's going on. And you're able to help critique each other, figure out what would happen in the reaction, and overall more practice for you, which is always great. The 7th tip is to go to your professor's office hours. Your teachers want you to succeed, and they're there to help you. Office hours are one of the best places to make a relationship with the professor as well. And this also could be even more beneficial if you're planning to go to like medical school or dental school or pharmacy school or whatever professional program you want to go to, because this gets you a relationship with them. And then once it comes time to applying to those programs, they would be able to write you a strong letter of recommendation because they know you on a more personal level compared to other students in the class that just essentially show up for the exam and never interact again. The 8th and final tip is before an exam, redo all your notes. So this means that the notes that were presented for the chapters that you learned have a bunch of practice problems typically with them. So what I found to be effective was that me and a friend, once again going back to that friend, we would take the notes and verbatim from the lecture, we would draw the structure with the reagents we were given and see if we were able to reproduce the answer that we got inside lecture. I would suggest giving yourself at least 2 weeks to do this method before an exam. However, if you're crunched on time, which occasionally it does happen to us, we are all busy students and sometimes we just lose track of time, 1 week should be sufficient enough. I found that when I took the course, I only did 1 week of doing this method where I would just go redo all the notes along with the end of the book problems. So just to summarize that, give yourself 2 weeks. If I was to do again, I would give myself 2 weeks to do almost all the end of the chapter book problems following the 80% rule, as well as the notes leading up to the exam. This really helped me prepare myself for questions that I was going to see in an exam, and I think it did help me do a lot better than if I hadn't done it on the exam. I hope this video was able to provide valuable information to you. If it did, I would really appreciate it if you would be able to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It would really help me out a lot. I hope you all crush organic chemistry this semester, and I hope to see you in the next one.